These huge settlements in Africa is the case study I'm going to show you. And of course, these were designed, they were forcefully designed by apartheid governments, and but they're actually designed now to change. They must change. So if Urban Think Tank were to call itself something, it's kind of activist design. It's kind of an entrepreneurial attitude towards activism, where we identify, we try and understand why things are wrong, interpret what, and learn to act where, and identify with whom to act, the actors. So let me give you a very recent example, because this is hot off the press. What's happening in Cape Town and all over Africa is that people are cooking and heating their homes with kerosene lamps. And this is just a fire that happened 2 weeks ago. 1,000 houses were burnt down. So this is an area called Masipumalele, which is a settlement that's about 30 years old in Cape Town. And this is kind of the expansion of Zimbabwe immigrants that have come, and more are coming from Zimbabwe to find work in Cape Town. And this is Lakeside, which is a very predominantly white community, in fact, completely white. And there's this buffer zone in between, which was very typical of apartheid planning. But these houses are all shining because they've just been reconstructed after the fire. That photograph I showed you at the beginning here is actually all been rebuilt. Now the crazy thing here is that all these new houses were planned by government. And that's what the crazy thing. All of this area that looks like junk space, which is the tin shacks after the fire, that's a shot after the fire. And the government came in and gave the community these kits and packs of 25 sheets of metal and some wood and a window and a door. And so the people went to reconstruct their houses. Now here you see Pumza showing you in what capacity they reconstructed with more density than before, and actually with very little accessibility. So the government was complicit in the process of creating more catastrophe, future catastrophe. And we'll see that in a second. So we have been instrumental, together with an NGO called Ikailami, in this idea called blocking out. What blocking out tries to do is to work with the community and take the shacks and redistribute them and try and move them to create more open and public space. Now, the examples for that have been very bad until we, let's say, we started to get involved, and we've now come up with some new solutions, which you'll see in a second. This reality is happening almost every week in Cape Town. And here you'll see them reconstructing because they have nothing better to do. We can take you through and show you how those spaces are. And you can't even find your way out. You can imagine a fire, what that would do as it catches from one house to the other, right? But then we do occasionally find some very interesting examples of someone who's built a double-story house. And this is really the key, the idea of building vertical and reducing the footprint. But the interesting thing is there's a breakdown, a total breakdown in governance for informality. No one knows what to do, there's no policy, there's not enough money, and there's no plan. In fact, there's not enough engineering, there's not enough thinking about the problem of the shack dwellers. But if we were to connect all the intelligence that South America has done, of course Africa, India, Bangkok, of course, with Sum Suk, who I understand was here recently in a conference at your organization, we could probably generate some incredibly interesting solutions. Now, if the first generation, let's say 19th century, was all about industrial expansion and industrialization, the 20th century was about mobility, trains, trams, and grids, and master plans, and modernism, and suburbia, and sprawls. The 21st century, in the urbanizing world, is going to be about temporary reprogramming the existing, micro spaces, informality, and a lot of it. So, in other words, all the failures of the 20th century city, the problems will be solved or thought about in the 21st century. We just did a show in Shenzhen, China. We were the curators of the Shenzhen Biennale, and we put together a group of architects and designers, and we called them radical urbanism, what they were doing. And I'm going to show you one of those radical places. So this is a map that shows you disaster, refugee, relief, places of extraction, mining camps, religious compounds around the globe. But I'm going to take you to this one place, which is called the Kumela. Maybe some of you know the Kumela. It's a temporary city for 30 million people that lasts 144 days. And it happens every 12 years on the Ganges River. So they dam the Ganges River. It's a religious festival. They dam it, and a beach forms around, and the military have organized quite well together with the communities and the religious groups to create these pontoons that get you to the island, and then they create a city that pops up as a temporary, flexible city. Why do I show it? I had the privilege to be there to watch this, but we were very interested in these systems of temporary, just with certain vertical elements and poles and bamboo, and then with fabric. So the pop-up city is really very lightweight in construction, and when the festival is over, they flood the Ganges again, and all of this becomes cleaned and no city. So this happens every 12 years. But it's quite amazing, the structures that are made for these temporary cities. Now we used that as part of our project to design an exhibition of our work. So an exhibition can also be a project. So we took regular sanitary drainage pipes, plastic drainage pipes, we adapted them and created a structure that would also work like these tent camps and these Kumela infrastructure. And then all the project was on fabric. And as this exhibition tours the world, when it's over, we can give the pipes back. They can be reused in homes and systems, and the fabrics then get cut up and reutilized as bags. So zero waste. So this is a bit of the philosophy of Urban Think Tank. It's always to work with scarcity as an idea. But more interesting, just to bring you back to the realities of Switzerland and ETH, you obviously know Einstein very well. This is when he was at Princeton, and he decided to create an Institute for Intellectual Cooperation. I think we need to design a kind of institute for the development of these informal areas in slums. A real kind of university to deal with the problems of slums around the world. Because as you know, and we will see in a second, slums are the fastest growing phenomena in the world. So architecture spatializes and materializes these uneven developments. And as professionals, architects have been complicit in that process. Because for some reason, there's not a very clear ethical code in the profession of the architect. So what you see here, this is just a strip of an avenue going from the airport of Bangalore to the city center. And you see one after the other, these advertisements, book a villa in peace and serenity. Some development agency, a bank or investment fund is going to wipe out this village in airport land, outskirts airport land, to create a very upper class development. Or you see here Luxuria, or you see here Gaudry Platinum, a life of privilege awaits you. So our exhibition in Munich, which is just finishing now, was called Si or No, which means an architect has to take a decision. Has to take a decision where he works and why he works and what his conviction is. We took a decision years ago when we started to map the amount of slums in Caracas. 60% of the population of Caracas lives in slums, and they live on 40% of the territory that you see here in yellow. But of course, we started to understand history too, that it's not new. John Turner, you guys might know, he was at the AA in London. John Turner wrote several books, Freedom to Build, Housing by the People, incredible books in the 60s, where he went to Arequipa in Peru, and he learned by the processes of the way people were building cities themselves. That still is going on. People are building cities one after the other themselves in the deserts of Peru. So our manifesto at that moment was, we didn't come here to follow courses of diplomacy. We didn't come here to acquire culture with a comfortable means. We came here to confront ourselves with the urban problems. And that didn't win us very many friends in Caracas. So, but now we're in a little bit more positive mode. I guess it might be Switzerland that has made us that way, and we feel hopeful that we can come up with more prototypes. And there are many, many examples of great village developments. This is Araña by Dochi, low-cost housing development in Indore. And you can see Previ project in Peru done in the 70s also was an incredible project of incremental growth, right? Houses that would build over time their housing. Now this is a pixelated map we did at Harvard, which is the true GIS, the determined growth of the population in the next 30 years, right? And so most of it will be in Africa, of course, around Lagos and around these areas. South America is pretty saturated already, and then it'll be in the Southeast Asia. And most of that development will be in slums. So architects should have, and planners should have a lot of work ahead, but we have to teach them because Europe is pretty much saturated. But the real work to be done is in the South. So our universities really have to tackle that. And the question is not whether buildings are sustainable, whether you put a green roof, recuperate rainwater in an individual building. The real problem of sustainability is whether these huge, gigantic, service-deprived areas and concentrations of poverty are sustainable. Our societies cannot sustain that any longer. So we were taught in university to do this, cut roads, put nice buildings in, call some good architects to build that way, but none of the embodied energy of cutting that, all the diesel being done, all the energy needed to build this can't even be recuperated in the lifetime of these buildings. And so when we saw this, we said, wow, this is really interesting. It's not perfect, it's not good, but it certainly must have examples. It must be an example of some other way to build. It's denser, less trash, more intricate, communities work, the blocks are more interesting. The sense of village, it's kind of a new medieval. So, but the real question was the distributive issues of equity, access, and social justice. So the right to the city, the right to infrastructure, the right to proper, decent housing, the resilience to natural disaster. And we wrote a book, maybe some of you know it, it's called Informal City Caracas Case. It was very much directed to Caracas.
I like several things in your presentation which struck me as very in synchrony with what we're looking and working and developing reflections on global economic development. The first approach, I mean, the incremental approach, I think for me was something which is key. I think in the International Labour Organization we have looked at the issue of informality in the area of labor. And we want to move from a vision where you just go from informality to formal, or you impose a formality. This is just not realistic. I mean, if there are plenty of reasons for informality in labor, there are probably many reasons for informality, as you rightly pointed. I mean, one could be the kind of restriction on the excess of land tenure, but it could be plenty related to resources, related also to the fact that we are facing an urban migration today, which is not the Fordist model of migration that we knew. I mean, that people were attracted to cities because there was employment in cities and because there were industrial powers that were attracting people. We have more, and this is probably what's happening in this house, more push migration from rural areas to urban areas, which means that people are drawn to the city and basically drawn to informality, informal housing, informal labor, because there are no jobs, basically, and there are no formal jobs, but it is not. So this incremental process where instead of imposing rights, imposing social protection, imposing but looking at opportunities to create bottom-up approach, I think is very valuable. That's the first thing. The second, which really resonated to my ears, which are very interesting, is all the community organizing processes. The South-South piece of cooperation is for me key, at least from my experience in local economic development, is a real key to the future.
Well, it's quite interesting because that idea that you need to be institutionalized or fall into some institutional pattern, but what happened to entrepreneurial? There's money out there. There's tons of money. Foundations money, social responsibility funds. There's money everywhere to invent projects that have significance. And if the project is really good, people will put their money behind it. So I just think it's just a very limited creative vision of what the role of an architect can be. So I'm interested in the expanding role of the architect. I don't even mind if he goes into the cinema industry, animations, if he goes into social development, if he goes into, it doesn't matter. What I'm interested is that people expand the role.
Another aspect I wanted to mention, which also kind of addresses this notion of the way of planning in the South. I actually talked or worked with students at the University of Addis Ababa, architect students, where the ETH also was highly involved in now Bauhaus University in Weimar, Germany. And it was really astonishing to see the design, the taste of the students. It was really looked like copy-pasted of what you can see now in China. It was like glass facades, everything was concrete, which of course in the local context doesn't make sense. But that is understood as modernity, that is modern, glass facades and concrete slabs. And unfortunately, in the planning processes, Professor Milberg was mentioning master plans. All the planning processes really follow like Western zoning plans. Maybe it came from colonial times, maybe it's just this view towards and addressing South-South corporations. So this view of what is the modern city, what is the new city, is merging, and it has developed to do these images of Dubai and Shanghai and all these high-rise buildings, as you've mentioned, the towers. And these cities are aiming of being modern, which is considered as the pure and true development, but actually it's the people, it's the slums, it's the informal spaces, but the informal spaces make more than half of the city, so why is that actually informal? Because that's the actual space of the city and the actual essence of the city. So I think we just need to understand like what makes our city livable and not classify the different elements, just understand that things are different in different parts of the city.
As I said before, I am not an architect, but I have seen things working. I remember, for instance, in Cochabamba, the School of Architecture of Cochabamba, it was at the time there would be a lot of mines closing, so the workers would be actually coming to the cities. It was a time of great rapid growth in Cochabamba, and the students in architecture would come and help the people who were actually doing some kind of auto construction, self-building, we would say in English. But I must say that the result was not very brilliant, unfortunately, because there was a kind of disorganization. Still, it was possible. And what I like very much with the examples that you are taking about Latin America is that naturally the mayor considers himself as the mayor for all the citizens of the city. While in the case of India, for instance, the mayor just doesn't care about the slum dwellers and considers them as migrants and people who are not citizens of the city, you see. And so at that moment, the mayors and the elite of the country just has absolutely nothing to do with the slum dwellers. So the outsiders, as we are, have this role to bridge.
Yeah.
We can bring a bridge, and we can sometimes make the difference through our speaking, through our publications, and also through our capacity to, how to say, cross the boundaries. That is, I can work in the slum in the morning and have lunch with the Secretary Urban Development at 4 hours later. And what I'm going to bring to him is something that nobody else can bring, because the social divisions are so tense and so radical that they don't know exactly what is happening in the slum. Just like to compare the cabinet members in the Ministry of Urban Development in Paris do not know what is happening in Clichy-sous-Bois. They don't have any idea, you see. So it is exactly the same, you see. So this is my only comparative advantage, I would say, which is this capacity, this possibility that I can speak with everybody and report to everybody.
And if anything validates this kind of work, it's that the Venice Biennale, that's always trying to be the greatest exhibition of architecture every 2 years, the Biennale, and it is now validating the point of social architecture, as having elected Alejandro Aravena from Chile, when that's what he does. He's a very young guy, he just won the Pritzker Prize also. So I think the community of the architectural community is actually signaling that this is the right thing. Why? Because the 21st century will be about community building, sharing, and democracy, and all of those things are all the key topics, whereas maybe the end of the 20th century was about making money.